So then what are the reservations against reservations in colleges? Well, let's get the last word on it.
Welcome to The Last Word. I'm Rahul Kanwal. In the midst of the exam season, students across the country are worried. In fact, very worried. Worried that their future could become bleak if the central government implements its controversial proposal to increase reservation in centrally funded educational institutions. IIMs, IITs, AIMS, NIF, National Law School, premier institutes for which students spend years preparing will be affected by the government's decision. Seats in the general category will come down drastically, but on the other side, students from deprived backgrounds will get a chance to study in institutes where they might not have otherwise reached. Is the government's proposal to have reservation for OBCs in educational institutes a good idea? Or are political parties merely playing vote bank politics and ruining the future of lakhs of students? That's the last word this week. To discuss, we are joined by a man who's been leading the demand for increased reservation, one of the country's foremost backward caste leaders, Union Minister for Chemicals and Fertilizers, Ram Vilas Paswan. To give us the perspective of the Congress party, we have its spokesperson Abhishek Singhvi. To talk about what the opposition's view on the matter is, we have Prakash Javadekar. Corporate India too is very worried about this plan. To give us a perspective, we have in Mumbai Sunil Alag, chairperson of the consultancy firm SKA Advisors. To tell us what students think of this government proposal, we have Ragini Nayak, president of the Delhi University Students' Union. And to talk about what non-politically affiliated students have to say, we have a very worried Abhijit Singh, an economics student at Hindu College. We'll begin with you, Mr. Singhvi. What's the government's justification for wanting to introduce this plan at this point in time?
I think there's a whole huge amount of misconception about this plan, which I would have the same reaction if I didn't know the facts. And this is very important. What is happening today, on which there is so much of hypocritical hullabaloo, especially by the opposition, is merely a consequence of what happened with their consent in January. In January, to be precise, 21st of January this year, the 93rd constitutional amendment was passed. And this is the unique thing about this. This is not an executive decision today. There is a constitutional amendment. You know how difficult it is in this country to get two-thirds consensus for that. That constitutional amendment amended an article of our constitution, Article 15(5), and said that you can have reservations specifically for OBCs in educational institutions. Now, prior to January, that could not be done. So the first point to be made is that all the people who are opposing today should have opposed the constitutional amendment in Parliament. The BJP and other parties supported it. Now today, if a legislation is passed, and that too a legislation by a constitutional amendment, not a statute or an act of parliament only, then I think the government is obliged to give effect to it.
So what you're essentially saying is that all the political parties are together on this, but Mr. Alag, the Congress party believes that reservation will help raise the standard of the deprived sections of society. Do you believe that's an argument enough to actually introduce reservation in the way the government intends to?
No, because even if we take what Mr. Singhvi just said, he said the resolution said you can have. It's like a king. You don't tell a king what you can do, you should tell the king what he should do. I mean, just because the resolution was passed that you can have it doesn't mean you wake up one fine morning and say, let's go ahead and do it. Look at what is happening around us, see where we are going. Do you want to average the country to a level of incompetence, or do you want to raise the standards in this country? I mean, the basic issue is that once you decide that, then it's a different issue.
But there's an important...
Right, let's just go across to Mr. Paswan here. Mr. Paswan, you're one of the leading lights of the Mandal movement in the country. You've essentially revolved your politics around this. What, according to you, is the justification to bring OBCs into this category now, considering that they weren't considered worthy of being included in that category because they're generally better off than the SC/STs are? So why include OBCs who are actually doing better than the SC/STs in the reserved category and thereby affect the chances of so many students?
देखिए, जब मंडल कमीशन लागू हुआ था तो उस समय में ये बात बार बार कही जा रही थी कि नौकरी में जो लोग रिजर्वेशन की बात कर रहे हैं, जब तक लड़के पढ़े लिखे नहीं निकलेंगे तब तक जो है नौकरी में कैसे रिजर्वेशन का प्रावधान पूरा होगा। और अब जब शिक्षण संस्थान में जो लोग मांग कर रहे थे कि पहले शिक्षण संस्थान में आरक्षण होना चाहिए, तो अब जब शिक्षण संस्थान में आरक्षण हो रहा है तो लोग विरोध कर रहे हैं, वही लोग विरोध कर रहे हैं। चूँकि जब तक जो एजुकेशंस हैं, नीचे के एजुकेशंस हैं, प्राइमरी एजुकेशंस हैं, हायर एजुकेशंस हैं, जब तक बैकवर्ड क्लासेस के लड़के, शेड्यूल कास्ट के लड़के, गरीब घर के लड़के आगे नहीं आएंगे, तब तक सरकारी नौकरी में जो रिजर्वेशन है उसका बेमानी होगा। और उस दृष्टिकोण से मैं समझता हूं कि ये रिजर्वेशन काफ़ी महत्वपूर्ण रखता है। और दूसरी बात, मुझको ये बात नहीं आती है कि जो लोग मेरिट की बात करते हैं वो मेरिट की बात वहाँ क्यों नहीं करते हैं जब एक जो है बिना मेरिट का लड़का 50 लाख 60 लाख रुपया दे करके, जो सबसे लोगों का जान माल से खेलने वाला जो होता है, डॉक्टर का पोस्ट होता है, इंजीनियरिंग का पोस्ट होता है, उसमें जाकर के एडमिशन लेता है। और अच्छे से अच्छे लड़के जो हैं वो रोड पर घूमते रहते हैं 90% 92% मार्क्स लेकर के, तो वहां कोई विरोध नहीं करता है। विरोध होता है
Mr. Paswan, because what Mr. Paswan is saying that essentially people who've got money are able to get into institutes. That's not necessarily the way forward either. But Mr. Javadekar, it seems that the opposition seems to have a very ambivalent line on the matter. It isn't quite clear what the opposition has to say on this matter. Are you against this policy? Are you for it?
BJP has a very clear-cut policy. We are for social-based reservation and we are against religious-based reservations. So our policy is very clear.
But you've questioned what the government's done.
One minute, let me complete. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and OBCs. OBCs after Mandal Commission and scheduled caste, scheduled tribes from the constitution, inception of constitution. They are provided reservation in education and jobs in practically all the institutes barring these central universities. So now the central universities, if they are getting, so we will never oppose the socially based reservation because it is a justification for that. But we always think, and our question is direct, that when you are giving OBCs the reservations in the central universities, why you are not giving scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and OBCs the reservation in minority prestigious institutes? That is
you
the
tried
question,
to make that happen, but you couldn't push the bill through in parliament.
That is the issue related to the whole reservation embargo. I am saying it very clearly that we are for social reservations. Always we were for social reservations. We are committed reservationists. The point is that has to be, they should get admissions and reservations in minority run institutes.
Let's clear 3 quick points. Number one, Mr. Javadekar therefore supports what has happened today. Let's be very clear. It's a social based reservation, OBC reservation, it's not a religious reservation. Number two, his opposition is the opposition not today, but to the enactment of the constitutional amendment in January 22nd, 21st, 2006. We argued it, that's right, so we argued it in parliament, he argued it, we argued it. Ultimately parliament by consensus took a decision, his point was rejected. So today, the minority institutions are exempt from this OBC reservation.
No,
that's a legislation now. It's not a question of discussion now.
So the politicians are putting a point and a counterpoint. Let's just bring in a student right now and get a sense of what the students actually have to say. Let's just bring in some students over here because, you know, the politicians might argue, but it's the student who gets affected. Abhijit, you've been listening to what's happening. How worried are you about what the government intends to do?
It's quite worrying because there's absolutely no space that is being left for ordinary students now, especially considering the fact that reservations start right from graduation, post-graduation, and regardless of what you want to do, if you want to like do a simple graduation or post-graduation, or whether you want to go in for the IITs or the IIMs. So in a sense, the space is getting less, and there are reservations in jobs, and the same government proposed reservations in the private sector as well. So the question is, where does an average student go, and is he being penalized for something that his forefathers may have done 5-6 generations back? Or does the state not have a responsibility to these students as well?
That's a very important point Abhijit raises. What can I do if I was born into a general category family? Does that mean that I don't have a chance? Will DUSU and other students union actually support these sort of students who are now finding their seats go down? Or are you going to be playing politics here?
What I think that the government works on the logic of the largest good of the largest number. And in a country where almost 60% of socially deprived youth has very restricted access to educational institutions, I think this move by government is I think it is in a direction to bring upliftment of the deprived in the social sections and to provide a very large chunk of the young population of this country with an opportunity to have access to
but the fact of the matter also
institutions.
remains, in the places that reservation is in place currently, lots of streets actually go begging because there's no one to take them up. They join the course and they drop out because they can't cope up. And over here we're talking about premier institutes where the quality of education is very high and it's difficult to be studying over there.
Study. I have the experience of my state and other states also. I have studied on this subject. See, the examination to be given by the students is the same. It is not separate for scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and OBCs. So it is the same examination. Those who qualify.
I don't know why the whole.
Let's just bring in Mr. Alag over here. Mr. Alag, do you believe that the quality of education at these premier institutes will suffer if we have a lot of people from the reserved category over there?
Yeah, you see, we are not arguing about the fact that whether you should try and get the upliftment of the poor. One fact which is being stated which is wrong is that anybody who joins an IIM, and I'm on the board of IIM Bangalore, if he qualifies and he's economically not able to pay his fees, he gets an immediate scholarship. So let's get it out of our heads that anybody who's poor who gets admission on merit, regardless of what class he comes from, is denied it because he doesn't have money. Let me tell you what OBC stood for was basically, if I go back in terms of why socially and educationally backward. Are we trying to say now the first level of socially is that every single wedding that takes place, 50% of guests should be from OBC? Every single politician who gets into parliament, 50% should be from OBC? Why are we just picking on educational institutions? So they are rich, as somebody pointed out. They come into IIMs. I can give you a large percentage who come in are from richer families. Today, we are penalizing. I'm not a Brahmin, so I can speak for them. Today, we penalize a poor Brahmin because he can't get in, he's got to get 90%, and you get somebody who's a rich OBC with 40% getting into IIM. Where is the rational and logic in all this?
That's an important point you raised. Let's just go across to Mr. Paswan. Mr. Paswan, would it not be better? You spoke about students who get 92% marks aren't able to get in. Wouldn't it be better to provide them with financial incentives, provide them with the backing to be able to actually go and take part in these institutes, as opposed to giving them reservation which allows them a direct entry?
Same question I want to ask, that the boys who are getting 92% pass marks, they don't get admission in engineering and medical, and those students who get only 50% marks, but he has capacity to pay
No, but that's the point I'm raising. Would it not be better for the government, and you're a part of this government, to actually give them some financial incentive, give them a loan so that they can participate in education, as opposed to giving them a direct reservation?
देखिए वो तो होना चाहिए, दैट आई एग्री कि फाइनेंशियल उनको मदद मिलनी चाहिए, लेकिन ये जो मेरिट का तर्क दिया जाता है, तो आपको मालूम होना चाहिए कि सबसे ज़्यादा रिजर्वेशन साउथ इंडिया में है। कर्नाटका और आंध्र प्रदेश और तमिलनाडु में सबसे ज़्यादा रिजर्वेशन है और 1921 से है, लेकिन आज तमिलनाडु, कर्नाटका और आंध्र मेरिट के मामले में सबसे ज़्यादा आगे हैं।
राइट,
इसलिए मेरिट का प्रश्न उठा करके जब आपने मंडल कमीशन जब लागू हुआ, सुप्रीम कोर्ट में मामला गया, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने मंडल कमीशन को सही ठहराया, तो जब गवर्नमेंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अमेंडमेंट बिल लाई, अभी बीजेपी के हमारे साथी कह रहे थे कि हम सोशली जो रिजर्वेशन है उसको तो हम सपोर्ट करते हैं, लेकिन जो रिलीजियस जो है उनका हम विरोध करते हैं। तो नाउ दे कहते हैं कि स्टूडेंट्स यूनियन में आप हर कास्ट के लोगों को रिप्रेजेंट देते हैं। आप जब स्टूडेंट यूनियन का चुनाव करते हैं तो देखते हैं कौन कौन कास्ट का है, सबका रिप्रेजेंटेशन होना चाहिए। तो देश को जब मजबूत करना है, देश को आगे बढ़ाना है, तो समाज के जो मेजॉरिटी जो लोग हैं उनको तो आपको आगे बढ़ाने के लिए कोशिश करना चाहिए। और इसलिए जब तक एजुकेशन में रिजर्वेशन नहीं होगा, तब तक सरकारी नौकरी में रिजर्वेशन देने का या प्राइवेट सेक्टर में जो हम रिजर्वेशन की मांग कर रहे हैं, तो वहां भी तो यही तर्क उठता है कि ये मेरिटोरियस नहीं है। तो मेरिट कहां से बनता है? मेरिट तो एजुकेशन से बनता है, स्कूल से बनता है, कॉलेज से बनता है।
Right, you made your point. So till the time you don't actually have reservation in educational institutions, the students will never come to a level where they can actually get a job in the private sector. Let's just head into a very short commercial break. When we come back, we look at how successful reservation has been so far and what will happen if reservation is brought forth and OBCs are given reservations, what impact it will have on the general students. Stay tuned to The Last Word. Welcome back to The Last Word. We're discussing the reservations about reservation. Let's just take a look at how the number of general category seats at different institutes will come down once the government introduces this new plan to have 27% reservation for OBCs. Let's take a look at the IITs. The total number of seats in the general category will come down by 1330. At each IIM like Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Lucknow, it will come down by 210. And at Delhi University, there will be a huge fall of 14,500 seats. The number of seats will come down from 35,000 to about 21,500. Abhijit, you're going to be taking papers to get into JNU or Delhi School of Economics next year. Your task will actually be a lot tougher than it would have been if you'd taken it this year. How worried are you?
It's an extremely important thing, considering the fact that just about anybody who wants to do a master's in economics will be applying to those two institutions anyway. So the pressure on these seats is immense. And at this time, you know, when you suddenly double the quota, there is a sharp reduction in the number of seats available. There's just 150 seats all told in Delhi School of Economics. Out of that, if you're giving 50 out, that means just 75 seats for general students from all over the country. So
But Mr.
that's-
Singhvi, you can't deny that. Won't this be a disincentive for all those students who work really, really hard for so many years to try to get into one of these institutes? Where do they go now? They'll all be forced to go abroad and study.
No doubt, to some extent, if the general seats are decreased, there is naturally a deprivation.
So what do you do
Naturally.
then?
No, but just look at the larger perspective. Number one, I have said, nobody has answered the basic question. When 2/3 of the entire MPs of this country vote for a constitutional amendment, it means they are deemed to represent the will of the 2/3
No, but they're
of
also
the
playing
people.
political games
Number
over here.
two,
They're not concerned about the
they are
students and their
supposed- How do you
future.
assume that? How do you assume that? You are not elected MP. The man who's elected an MP is supposed to represent the will of the people. That's the whole meaning of democracy. The people don't themselves sit in parliament. Second, it is wrong to suppose that there is meritless within the OBC category. This is a big fallacy. People assume that if you have a reservation, the people who get in on the reservation are meritless. Within that OBC category, there is very strong merit. It's just that, because don't forget, in our country, OBC is a very large number. There are lakhs of OBCs. Within that, there is very stiff competition.
No,
And
but
merit is
Mr.
there. Number
Javadekar, in
three,
an
number
instant-
three, just 1 minute. Number three, this does not mean that people fall to a level just at the pass mark. That's not so. These people may be 3, 4, 5% behind at the most, but otherwise within their competition, within the category there is competition, and they are not that much behind the ones who get in the general category.
But Mr. Javadekar, in institutes like IIMs and IITs, the global reputation that they now have is because of the sort of students who study there and the increased amount of competition between them. Will it not be a disincentive for other students? Where do these people actually go? That's an important question nobody's looking at.
I'll tell you, here it is, the scene is like this, that even today there is reservation in IIMs and IITs for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes with 22%.
But you're increasing that
nothing-
substantially.
See, the reputation has not spoiled with this reservation. Now as far as OBCs is concerned, I can guarantee you, and from next year you can count, that the last candidate marks in the general list
Alright.
and the last candidate's marks in OBC list, you will find difference of only 1 or 2%. So that is one. But my basic point again is that these OBC students, these scheduled caste students, these scheduled tribe students have the right to have reservation everywhere, and why they are not being guaranteed in minority institute. That is
only
the
in the
problem.
admission process. It's not actually in the examination process as well. So you have to go through the same curriculum, the same examination process and everything. So I don't think the output of merit is
Right.
a question.
Let's
anywhere.
bring in Mr. Alag over here. Mr. Alag, the politicians seem to believe that it won't really make much of a difference in the way these institutes are perceived or in the quality of students who study over there. Will the recruitment policies of corporate India have to change because of what's going to happen after this reservation plan is implemented?
For all politicians, it suits them to take figures, and when it doesn't suit them, not to quote the figures. If you look at all in IIMs and in the IITs, what has been given to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, they have not come up, and there's a big gap in standards. If you're trying to fool the public by saying there's 1% and 2%, there's never a problem. If they're at 90% with the rest, if they don't have the money, the IIMs give the scholarships. They're at 60. Please look at the facts, and by reserving seats, you are getting 60% students to compete with 90%. So let's average this to a country of incompetence then. You give a reservation at school levels, do that. That's the crying need. If a person who's gone through school through reservation, gone through his BA through reservation, hasn't made the grade, why do you want to reserve him at a postgraduate level? You are just bringing it down. If by that time, everyone who's got I'm for reservations at primary level, I'm for reservation at the college level, but after that, if the kid doesn't make the mark, do not reserve it at a postgraduate level which requires high skills. Tomorrow you will say 50% of the cricket team should be based on OBCs because they don't have a chance, so all the Tendulkars and all should be out. Where is this country going?
Right, Mr. Singhvi, if...
rhetorically good question, but let me
No, but will you allow 50% reservation in lawyers category? Will you allow that to
But the
happen?
lawyers don't have to practice law. How do you have reservation in practice? Can you say that all the
people
clients
in
who
the
come 50%
management
will go
cadre
to a
practice
lawyer?
management?
You see, you are applying things which can't be applied. You cannot apply to certain. Can you say that a client, a patient who's unwell, must 50% go to 50% OBC doctors? You can't apply it in a profession. That's wrong. Now, the real point here is, Mr. Alag has somewhat wrongly and misleadingly mentioned SC/ST. SC/ST is different category. We are not today discussing SC/ST at all because that's a reservation from 1950 onwards, which is part of the country. Now, there I admit the mark is different. Let Mr. Alag check his figures. The mark between the general category and the OBC category is not the same hiatus or the differential as between the general category and the SC/ST category.
Right.
That's one.
Then why do you want to reserve seats?
The total.
Why do you want to reserve seats?
No, that's another issue. Secondly,
Then why do you want to
the
reserve
reservation
seats?
will be as per rules, regulations and Supreme Court judgments which restrict it to within 50%. People assume there will be across the board reservation. No. If the total is 50%, all that you can go up to, 24 or 27 is already reserved for SC/ST. That means the OBCs will get only the balance out of 50%.
Let's just go across to Mr.
And third,
Paswan now.
why reserve at all? Why reserve at all? Let me answer that question. Why reserve at all is the larger philosophical question. Who addresses that? I mean, I entirely agree and I concede space to you and to other people in this program that there can be 2, 3, 4, 5 views of reservation. No two people will agree on reservation. The question is, somebody has to take a decision. What is the decision in democracy? The will of the majority in a democracy has to bind even the minority.
Okay,
the majority in this
point.
country,
Let's now go across to-
2/3 by a constitutional amendment believe that reservation for OBCs is valid. Who are we to question it then?
Right, but
2/3 means 2/3 of the MPs of this country.
But the important question then, Mr. Paswan, is how long will this reservation stay in place? When reservation was introduced the previous time, they said it will be there for 10 years. Not one political leader has said that let's now get rid of reservation because it's achieved its purpose. Once this law is implemented, it remains in place for perpetuity.
देखिए, रिजर्वेशन दो तरह के होते हैं, एक पॉलिटिकल रिजर्वेशन होता है और एक सरकारी नौकरी में रिजर्वेशन का सिद्धांत था। तो जो सरकारी नौकरी में और शिक्षण संस्थान में रिजर्वेशन था उसके लिए 10 साल कभी संविधान में नहीं रखा गया था। संविधान में जो 10 साल का पीरियड था वो पॉलिटिकल रिजर्वेशन के लिए था, जो विधानसभा और लोकसभा में होता है, और उसके लिए 10 साल बढ़ाया जाता है। यदि किसी
ये जो आरक्षण होगा कितनी देर तक रहेगा ये बताएं? क्या आप 10 साल बाद कहेंगे कि जो मकसद था वो पूरा हो गया, अब आरक्षण की जरूरत नहीं?
ये नहीं, मैं ये नहीं कहता हूं। ये आरक्षण बढ़ता जाएगा और बढ़ रहा है। सिर्फ आरक्षण शेड्यूल कास्ट, शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स और बैकवर्ड क्लासेस को नहीं मिल रहा है। जो भूतपूर्व के अगर सैनिक हैं उनके लिए भी रिजर्वेशन है, जो विकलांग हैं उनके लिए भी रिजर्वेशन है, किसी दिन महिला के लिए भी रिजर्वेशन की मांग की जाएगी। इसलिए ये कहना मैं समझ नहीं पा रहा हूं डिस्कशंस में कि मेरिट के ऊपर में ये लोग विरोध कर रहे हैं कि सीट के लिए विरोध कर रहे हैं। सीट के लिए यदि IIM और इसमें IIT में विरोध हो रहा है तो फिर उसके सीट को बढ़ा दीजिए। लेकिन एक तरफ में जहां मेरिट की बात करते हैं तो कैपिटेशन फी पर कोई नहीं बोल रहा है, और जहां सीट की बात आती है तो सीट पर आप कहते हैं कि इसमें इतना सीट घट जाएगा तो इतना सीट बढ़ा दीजिए।
इसलिए ये मामला जब भी कोई मामला आएगा, Mr. Javadekar, is that actually a solution? We already have a situation in IITs and IIMs where the number of faculty is less than what it should be. Infrastructure is at a premium. If you increase the seats, that doesn't really solve the problem.
See, when thousands of students from this country go abroad for training and education, that means there is a scope for increase of the strength basically, and that infrastructure, educational infrastructure, you have to increase, which you are not increasing. That is the basic failure. Second, this reservation or any reservation
it first
will
and then
not,
make these
will
changes.
not, I don't
Shouldn't
believe.
you increase infrastructure and then make these changes?
No. You have to go both hand in hand. You can't stop reservation as you have not increased, but you have to increase the basket itself. Then you have to make everybody participate. And I agree on one point that, see, nobody says that the reservations will be in perpetuity. It will always be time.
Are you telling me that in a few years from now you'll actually say reservation have done what they had to and let's get rid of them?
If the purpose of the reservation is fulfilled, and after 2 or 3 generations,
that will be a very politically unpopular move. We politicians must have the courage to do that.
That is what I am saying. After 2-3 generations, if you find, then nobody says that reservation is a thing in perpetuity. Not constitution makers have never said that. But till today,
for the politicians it is very convenient.
But till today, this is necessity, and for years to come, this will be necessity.
All right, so the politicians have said what they had to. We'll let Abhijit have the last word. It's you and others like you whom such a decision will affect the most. Do you believe that students in India will now be forced to go abroad and study over there, especially those who would fall into the general category and not really get the sort of opportunity that they would, at least the ones who are a little less sharper and brighter than the best, will now be forced to look outside?
Well, I doubt it, because most of them will not be able to afford going outside. Even those from better families have incomes of at the maximum 3 lakhs, 5 lakhs. That's not enough for going abroad. So eventually what it means is that they will be deprived of quality education. Why? Because the domestic educational system is not able to sustain it, and because of the simple reason that misplaced vote bank politics is playing with their future. Which is why this announcement comes before the elections.
Yeah, it is interesting that it's come right before the elections, and elections in states like UP are also around the corner. That's another matter altogether, but it seems that the government might be implementing this and students are bound to be affected. We'll be tracking the story very, very closely, but thanks so much all of you for participating. I can assure you for once, this is not the last word on the issue. We'll be hearing a lot more about the reservation debate, but for the moment we're winding up our show. We'll see you again same time next week. Till then, from all of us here, goodbye.